Yousif Naser is a refugee of first generation. He had to flee his country, Iraq, when he was a young man after studying at the Academy of Fine Arts in Baghdad. And he's lived a refugee life ever since. And he is a great friend of ours and a great friend of humanity. And I just could talk about him a lot, and I'm sure we will organize another meeting where each of you could be a star, because it's worth it, and especially Yousif. So over to you, Yousif.
Yousif, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Yes, do you hear me now?
That's much better, thank you.
All right, thank you, Joanna. I don't consider myself a refugee anymore, it's gone. I'm here I've been out of my country most of my life, so it's not refugee anymore. I mean, it's my life here. Most of the memories I found about the Polish in Iraq was about their involvement in the Iraqi culture, especially art culture, art movement, and their influence on it. I don't know why. There's not much about their social life, very little things, because maybe the people who start writing about the Poles in Iraq were the artists mainly and art critics, not historians, because they were part of the British Army. That's one important point to understand, to know. It might be surprising to some people to understand or to hear that there were very strong ties between Iraq and Poland, which is a bit strange, in art, I mean, in art. But that's what happened in the 40s of the last century. The Poles arrived from Iran in 1941. There were, and I'm actually lucky to just announce that two of the young artists at the time became my teachers in the Academy of Fine Arts when they were a bit, old men. These two teachers met the Poles and learned a lot from them, so they could have. I heard from them directly about their experience in the Poles. The Poles started arriving to Iraq from Iran and from Turkey and Palestine. When it was called Palestine, it was no Israel at the time. In 1941, and they settled in Baghdad and around Baghdad and in Basra. They were invited to protect, mainly army people. There were about 70,000 of them. Not all army, 70,000 of them. The first wave were 70,000. 50 were army personnel and 20 civilians, 20,000, civilians, children and women. These people settled around Iraq, in Basra in the south, and in the north, and in the center where Baghdad is. In 1942, the end of September, these forces, 50,000 men, joined the British invaders in Iraq. At the time, the British invaded Iraq. So the Poles joined them to protect the transport links and petrol wells and the petrol pipelines and so on. Because the British needed men, so they brought these people from Iran and from Russia and from Palestine and Egypt. And then the Polish government in exile formed the Polish army in the east. And the luckiest part of it is that their central office, let's say, was in Baghdad. So the Polish army central point was in Baghdad. And then after that, General Anders came, I mean, the same year, later this year. And then they based in many places around Baghdad, as I said. Sorry, all my notes are in Arabic, so I'm translating them. They stayed in Iran, these forces stayed until the end of...
Yousif, would you like us to show the slides as you are speaking?
Yeah, it's up to you, it's up to you.
But do you want them, as you are speaking, yeah?
Well, you can repeat them if you want. The Polish personnel stayed in Baghdad. They established many associations and many committees for like teaching committees, for political committees, and then one of them was the Diplomatic Commission in Baghdad, which was the first Polish commissions abroad, because the Iraqi government accept, what they call it, I don't know the verb in English, the Polish government in exile. The one main association was the Bureau of Information and Culture in the Polish Army of the East, and that was the central office was in Baghdad. Not only in Baghdad, it was in Rashid Street. Rashid Street is the one at the time was the main street in the whole town, and maybe in Iraq. Coincidentally, with very good luck, that bureau was just next to the Brazilian cafe, and the Brazilian cafe at the time was a coffee shop for artists and writers and poets and so on to meet. So the Polish people in the office just walked to have a coffee in this place, which is only a few meters away. And then there they met the Iraqi intelligentsia. And they start this relationship with them. And they opened a restaurant called Polska, Rashid Street. And they turned that restaurant into a restaurant and an art gallery. One of the beautiful things about that gallery was a poster hanged in the front of this restaurant by the Iraqi, at the time, very young artist Jawad Salim. And it was the first Iraqi colored poster published. We don't know any posters before that in colors and printed. And Jawad Salim is the pioneer of the Iraqi modern art movement. He's the one who influenced the whole art movement in Iraq and the Middle East, actually. And although he died very young, he was young, I mean, he's in his 40s, but his influence is still there. And he got some of that from the Polish, because he studied in Slade and he studied in the Beaux-Arts, but he cut his studies in Europe because of the war and came back to Baghdad to meet the Polish people. And the most important point that Jawad wrote, he wrote his memoirs when he was very young. A large part of this memoir is about the Polish people, in the Polish artists in Baghdad. And this is one of the only, one of the rare, let's say, documents, vivid documents, we have about the Polish people in Baghdad. Otherwise, we have lots of newspapers, things, and but it's not as the same way the Jawad Salim wrote, because he wrote directly into the influence of these people on the Iraqi new modern art movement, and about the people themselves, about the artists themselves. The Polish in Baghdad published 3 newspapers. One of them called the Polish Newsletter. The other one is the White Eagle, which is a cultural magazine. And the third one was the Holy Name. That's a religious one, which is 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. They all published in Baghdad, and it's distributed in other countries in the Middle East. And the other thing is they established the music and group, folk Polish music group in Baghdad, and the classic music group in Baghdad, and the Polish theater, the mobile Polish theater, which go around Iraq to, and I think we have some photographs. I don't know what, they are not included with what Joanna did, although we had them before, about the first plays. They perform many plays. This picture is when they left Iraq and went to Palestine. Not all of them. I mean, many of them stayed back, but the main forces went to Palestine. Among the 50,000 soldiers or army personnel, there were 30 artists, men and women. I have a list here of the names, but the most famous ones of them, the big names, were Yousif Jabasky, Yusuf Yarima, Edward Motosiak, Zygmunt Ha and his brother Lubot Ha, Felix Tobolsky, Vladimir Hovman, Rikmont Torkovich, Janina Burgotsa, Kordikanza, and so on. And of course, among them there were some poets and some playwrights and musicians, of course. Jawad Salim has the vivid, I repeat that again, sorry, he has the very vivid memoirs about them, and no other history. I mean, there are many people wrote about them, but if you go back to the newsletters, the Polish published in Baghdad, you will find lots of things about their influence and their involvement in the Iraqi daily life, especially in the art. Jawad Salim was very influenced and very proud to know Yousif Jabasky. He thought, he wrote in his memoirs that Yousif Jabasky is one of the greatest artists ever. And Yousif himself was the manager of the Bureau of the Information and Culture of the Polish Army in Baghdad, and he was an art critic, and he an artist, and he was a writer. I think he's known in Polish because I asked an Iraqi friend who lived in Polish, and he said he's familiar with that name. On top of that, the Polish themselves took part in the Iraqi annual exhibitions for the Union of Iraqi Artists at the time. And they show their work. But the main, and Yousif Jabasky wrote a beautiful article, I read some of it, about the Iraqi art movement at the time, and the Iraqi heritage at the time, which is very important, from a mature artist to look at the Iraqi newly developed art movement and write that article about it, and his advices to the Iraqi young artists were included, because Jawad Salim, the one I just mentioned, he was a young artist at the time. He was in his 20s. The major event was the exhibition organized by the Polish artist, which calls the exhibition of Polish soldiers. The exhibition of Polish, that's the name of it. It was opened on the 15th of February 1943 in the British consulate in Baghdad. And this was attended by the king and by the crown guardian and by the prime minister and many ministers and lots of European diplomats. And the queen, the crown guardian bought 4 paintings from Yousif. And one painting, which we have the picture of it here, has a little nice story for Jawad Sali, Faiq Hassan, the other artist who taught me directly. I was not taught by Jawad Salim because when I went to the Academy of Fine Art, he was already dead. He died in 1961. And he is the man who did the freedom sculpture, what they call it, in the middle of Iraq, which is still there. It's very large. But Faiq is his colleague, and he taught me. And there is a photograph I sent to Joanna by email for me and him. He was my teacher, and he was an old man when I was very young at the time. So Edward Matojak wanted to paint a local woman portrait, and he wanted to. Faiq Hassan said, okay, we can paint my mother, but how can they convince the mother to sit? Because that's shame, that's haram, that's lots of things. So he convinced her to sit for them, and they did 2 portraits of her. And because Matushak was pointillism, one of the pointillist artists. So when she saw the painting, she thought, oh, this is rubbish. This is only dots. And what is it? Where am I? It's not a picture. So that was very good, very helpful. Helped him to take the painting out of the house. Otherwise, she wouldn't allow him to take it out. This is shame. And he took this painting to Palestine. It was exhibited in Jerusalem. And then he took it with him to England. And he died, by the way, he died in 1993. But then this painting was lost. And the only picture which we have here, we can see, that was printed on the catalogue of the exhibition itself. So the only picture we have is that one. That exhibition was very important in Iraq art history. Art movement. It's very important. Change the whole core of things. For me, when I read about it, it reminds me of another Polish activity in Baghdad. It took place in 1973 when I was a student in the Academy of Fine Art, and there was the Polish poster exhibition. And that was an amazing event. All Iraqi artists came, all Iraqi and their friends came, thousands and thousands of people came from all Iraqi cities to see it. And it was being used beautifully as a tool against fascism, because all artists, lots of artists, start doing posters in different ways. And they had a very large exhibition after that for Iraqi artists in the Iraqi Union in Baghdad. And it was clearly influenced by the Polish artists. That's why you see in these pictures Joanna is showing now 3 or 4 images for the project magazine. This project was known in Iraq. That one, yes, I knew this. I saw it when I was a student. And to be a good poster artist, you have to have a copy of the project. That was very important application in the in any studio in Baghdad. So, but when I left Iraq, of course, I lost them all. And here in Britain, I found some 6 or 7 copies in a charity shop, and I bought them, of course. And I still have 4 of them because I gave 2 somewhere else. Yeah, this was and is still a very important magazine, one of the most important and influential magazine about art. And I still read them, and I still read it, and still find it very important, really. Let me just tell you one thing about how do people, not many things wrote about socially about the Polish in Iraq. I didn't find anyway, because now I'm not in a very good time to search for that. A poet called Abdullah al-Bayati, he's very well known. He's a very famous Iraqi poet from the new generation who established with the Shakir Sayyab the new movement in poetry, and they turned the whole 14th century poetry writing and reading in classic in Arabic into a new form of free verse and so on, free ideas. Abdullah al-Bayati wrote, he was walking in the street and he saw, he used to see Polish and British soldiers walking together. What he said, I'm translating from it, the British have controlled everything in our country. To see them with the Polish and the Indians are very common thing to see in Iraq streets and in public places. I remember we didn't at the time we couldn't find any. We didn't find it difficult to recognize the Polish soldier from the from the English one, although they look the same. Because the English walks straight, doesn't mix with people, doesn't mingle with them, doesn't mix with them. He acts like a real invader. But the Polish are very cheering, simple, and very nice people to talk to. And they sit in the cafes and they go to see old Baghdad and talk to people and so on. So this is his impression about the Polish in Baghdad. It's a long thing, to be honest. It's very long. I think I finished my 10 minutes. Anyway, if you want me to speak more, I will, but not so soon. I mean, I have a lot of information about that. But in general, the Polish effect on Iraqi art movement was important, although some art critics, now I read some articles, these people say that the role of the Polish in Iraq was exaggerated, and we should really not do that, and we should look at our artists, they were good artists and so on. But I'm looking at our pioneers in modern art movement in Iraq, and they talk about that. I mean, they say they open their eyes.
Yousif, fantastic. Yeah, that's really, it's melody to my ears to hear it, or music to my ears. And I think that's something that connected us. This art appreciation, your talent, and your appreciation of this fantastic connection of the Orient and Occident, the two cultures of East and West in Baghdad during the war, because of the war, was possible, and it still bears fruit. So that's wonderful. And like we agreed quite a number of years ago, I think it's been a decade or more, we definitely are going to work on this project. And I'm very happy that I purchased this book which inspired me to purchase. And I think I added the picture.
By the way,
for David, who kindly put the pictures and Ella is showing. Others artists, Continuta and Novita. And Mr. Jan Wiktor Sienkiewicz wrote another book, and there is a translation in English, all to do with Anders artists, which is quite an amazing thing, because you know they were so tired after just worn out after all that was happening, had been happening to them in Siberia, etc. And then, you know, they needed to be trained and ready for the action, etc. So they needed some occupation apart from the military training, and their artistic skills were wonderfully utilized and inspired and put into good use. And I'm so happy to hear how you, I mean, your ancestors, your professor, how they perceived the Polish people, that they mixed with them, that they were friendly. I think this is so important, that we are open to other people, to others. And, you know, even among the English ones, there are some who are like that. So.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed by how those English people behave. I did not behave like that in Baghdad.
And I'm
myself.
very well aware that some people have, you know, we went over time so much. So please, those of you who absolutely have had enough of us, please accept our apologies.